All right, everyone, let's get started. I'm really pleased to introduce Creating Unity Park today, brought to you by the Intersection Symposium through the BSA's Women in Design and BosNOMA communities, knowledge communities. Today, we're talking with Lisa Giersbach and Gigi Saltonstall, who are both co-founders and principals at G2 Collaborative. We have Gretchen Rabinkin, Executive Director of the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, and Patty Seitz, Professor and Chair of the Architecture Department at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Here we are today. We're in the middle of our symposium, our really fun and exciting symposium this year. So this is Wednesday, and we're the second session. A couple of logistics. Please feel free to use the chats for questions. Use the Q&A chat box actually for the questions, and use the chat for chatting with each other. There will be AIA credits and a link will be posted really soon. Madeline Hikes from the BSA is here to help us should there be any technical issues during the session. So her contact information is listed here. All right, with that, Lisa, hand it off to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Make sure. Okay, can you all see my screen? Team? Okay, great. Okay, thank you everyone for attending today's talk. We had originally planned to present this as a tour on site, but due to construction delays, we unfortunately couldn't make that possible. But what it did do for us was to lay out what is perhaps maybe a more poignant presentation in what we wouldn't be able to show you on site. There's really so much to talk about relative to the process of creating Unity Park, more than is visible through the finished product. Though we're very pleased with the almost finished product, and we encourage people to visit very soon. We want to introduce how so many different players came together with an idea and a mission to engage a community, and in particular, a community youth group to transform a vacant parcel of land, to create a park in their neighborhood that would welcome seniors, adults, teens, and young children of all abilities. Here you can see all of the players in this with us on the left-hand side of the screen here. The Global Design Initiative for Refugee Children, the BSA, the BSLA, the Lena Park Community Development Corporation, who we'll be talking a lot about at the beginning of our program today. And then really behind the scenes, Anthony Crisafulli, who's a photographer, who was amazing in really giving his time to come in to the initial charrettes with this group to take photographs. So a lot of the images you'll see today are his, as he's been documenting this process. Cambridge Landscape Company, who has been a stalwart supporter in creating this park for us and building it. And they're almost done. And G2 Collaborative, ourselves, the designers. So we do hope to talk to you today about the power and the importance of play, educating communities and youth in particular about the shaping of outdoor spaces, and to present to you a particular case study of an engagement strategy that sought to educate a local Dorchester youth group and local community organization to empower them to imagine, to design, and to realize the construction of a space for their families and for their neighbors. So to start, I'd like to hand it off to Gretchen, our BSLA director, to talk about the Global Design Initiative for Refugee Children and the work that the BSA and the BSLA is doing here at home through education.
Thank you.
Gretchen.
Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor and a joy to be here with all of you today. I'm going to speak a bit about the larger project that this came out of. Lena Park began as part of what we affectionately called the Playground Project, and what we now more formally call the Global Design Initiative for Refugee Children, or GDI for short. And today this is a joint knowledge committee of BSA and BSLA. The Global Design Initiative was formed by a big bunch of architects and landscape architects, students and faculty, engineers and product vendors, and others in Boston's design community in 2016 in response to the Syrian refugee crisis, with the goal of using design to fill the gaps left by humanitarian aid. This mission evolved into designing communal spaces for refugee families and children living in temporary encampments globally, including those living in at-risk communities in the United States. And it all began with architect Natalie Beauvais asking, how can we, as a Boston design community, help? And after several years, dozens of student design faculty and professional volunteers, in fact, probably some of you who are in the audience with us today, there was a summer visit. You can see Stephen Gray there on site in Lebanon and countless Skype calls. This led to the design and construction of several playgrounds with, by, and serving refugee communities in Lebanon. But fast forwarding over a whole bunch of stuff, in addition to ongoing projects abroad, in 2018, we also turned our attention to working at home. Though Lena Park is not a refugee camp by any means, there were also challenges faced by immigrant communities and residents at risk, and a lack of safe places to play. And as we shared the playground project work with Nadine Brown at the 2018 BSLA conference, she shared some of the priorities and needs of Boston communities in open space through the lens of the Community Preservation Act, which was then brand new to Boston. Nadine suggested that Lena Park might be a good fit for our local activity. And so actually I should say what you see there on the screen on the right is, progress photos, some of those photos of one of those first playgrounds in Lebanon and kids playing on the structures. And then on the left, the Lena Park site as it was in 2018. And this all also builds on a long-term effort to engage young people in thinking about the design of their world, such as these snapshots from the Each One Makes event, which took place at BSA Space, including, again, probably many of you on this call today, architect and landscape architect volunteers and kids in early March 2020, just before all things, just before our world changed. And that is part of a whole great big constellation of stuff, such as Kids Build and in-school programs and specialized on-site community engagement, such as the Wilson Street Community Garden. And the BSA has a long history of working with children and youth. Here we can see Polly Carpenter there in the baseball hat out on site with the Apprentice Learning City. Photos likely taken by Taylor Johnson and co-led by Taylor too. And so many volunteers who have been helping with this work over the years. And this outreach includes meeting kids where they are, in schools, in communities, and taking longstanding activities like Kids Build outside. Some of this aims to introduce kids to design careers. And even more importantly, no matter what career path these kids choose, the ultimate goal is to help the young people imagine and act to improve the built environment of their worlds, wherever they are. And so for BSLA, where this is going now is in a studio workshop program, which we piloted this past spring, which we called the Super Studio. And like the GDI projects, it's a partnership model, bringing the collective technical expertise of the landscape architecture and design community in collaboration with a community-based organization or school. The teens focus on a real-world problem in their neighborhood with studio instructors who are design grad students, each cohort tied to a professional firm mentor. Last spring, we piloted two, one on the North Shore with Governor's Academy, Northeastern University students and Bishop Land Design. And the other was based here in Boston in partnership with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, Boston Architectural College students, and Reed Hildebrand through a 12-week paid after-school program for 10 high school teens. And the super studios are all thinking about issues of climate action, jobs, and justice. In Boston, that meant diving into this resilient vision. And here we see, Scape's rendering of that overall view, but then more specifically diving into the site of Franklin Park, which incidentally is near Lena Park and near the homes of these teenagers. And it's also the focus of a major replanning process that's underway now, being led by the landscape architecture firm Reed Hildebrand. And again, I'm going to keep this high level. I won't get into the specifics, but I want to emphasize for us today, as we set the stage, is this interaction of the high school students, the grad student instructors, and the design professionals, and the shared learning that went back and forth as they explored the site together. And also the shared visioning, which took place both outdoors, on site, and virtually. Here on the bottom left, in one of my favorite moments, a complete mashup of physical and digital, the Boston teens and the Newberry teens are sharing their sketches with each other in a collaborative workshop session. It's vital that young people have a voice in the future of their communities. And this intergenerational, cross-sectional collaboration among students and professionals, public and private sector, community members, and more, brings us to the heart of the Lena Park process. And with that, I am honored and delighted to pass the microphone to my colleague and friend, Patty.
Thank you, Gretchen. And thank you all for being here. So a charrette was held in 2018 on June 2nd that addressed 3 sites, one in Lebanon, one in Turkey, and shown here a third for Lena Park CDC in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And that paired Lena Park's Youth Council with members of Boston's design and design build community. Our goals were to support, and continue to be, to support at-risk neighborhoods that includes diasporic families from outside the US, opportunities for local architects and landscape architects to work within our group in local neighborhoods who might not be able to travel overseas, as some of us did in the summer of 2017 to Lebanon. And also to partner with the Lena Park Youth Council, who we asked to represent Lena Park CDC as the client voice. This charrette was preceded by a meeting we attended with Lena Park CDC prior to this, to begin engagement with the Youth Council for a playground on a 5,000 square foot piece of land the CDC owned, adjacent to one of their housing projects. At that prior meeting, they discussed their wishes for a park to unify the many cultures of their neighborhood and coined the Unity Park name. The meeting commenced with a presentation of the GDI work. Here you see Gretchen having a conversation of the recently completed open space playground project in Lebanon, which you saw just recently in earlier slides. A central goal of the collaboration with Lena Park intends to expand the standard community engagement and design process to not only provide designer opportunity to gain insight, but to additionally empower communities to lead in the design of their own spaces. At that charrette, the youth and executive director worked together with the designers, faculty, and alumni from Boston area architecture and landscape architecture schools, and developed 3 schemes. These schemes were both in 2D and 3D, and they developed, as you can see, they developed ideas, and everyone made and shared their sketches in 2D and 3D. The Lena Park youth also developed design sketches, and noted here, they quickly became central to the entire process. Here engaged with Mitch Ryerson, a playground designer builder, GDI, and he is a GDI member of the team. And everyone shared sketches from many hands that were sitting there. The community cookout occurred several weeks later at the end of July, and again in still in 2018. The youth presented 3 schemes that they had developed and the team had drawn up, materials boards, references, and precedents to the Lena Park community. This also included interviewing by the Youth Council with us of the intergenerational members from toddlers to elders of the community who attended. All ages were encouraged to directly comment on the images. The 3 schemes developed, and you can see some of them here, helped them to understand some of the ideas that were going on, helped GDI to coalesce these ideas from the 3 schemes reflected. And one is Plaza and Play. We had Secret Garden. That one actually took into the idea of being private in the back, and then a flexible plaza, which tried to energize the plaza with multiple uses that could be changed and interpreted in multiple ways. And then we have the final one. This work and comments helped the GDI to coalesce these ideas from the 3 schemes. And with the executive director of Lena Park, we developed a CPA grant proposal for funding the project that included this final design and a cost estimate. After the grant receipt some months later, GDI developed a list of landscape architects from the various groups with playground expertise, including those that participated in our charrettes the prior summer. Each group presented qualifications and approach to the CDC. G2 Collaborative was selected for their exceptional group and participatory design process. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the design team, Lisa and Gigi from G2. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Patty. Yes, so we are, G2 Collaborative is a small women-owned and right now currently all women staffed office in Waltham. And you see across the top of this slide, Lisa and I and our team, and this was really a project that everybody in our office has had their hands on at some point. So it's been a really fun kind of group project for us. But as a firm, we do a broad spectrum of work, but we are very interested in community engagement and the creation of vibrant public spaces and in the importance of play. So when we learned about this RFP, we really were excited to put our hats in the ring, and especially when we see a project like this where there is an interest in thinking about play in really multidimensional ways, not just the way we often traditionally think of play as being kind of typical play equipment in a space. The project that probably is one of the things that got us involved is a project we worked on at the Harvard Yard Child Care Center. And it was you can see on the left, it was an underutilized kind of worn out play space. And we were hired to reinvigorate this space. And one of the things that we did in looking at this space was really trying to understand behaviorally what was going on in the space. So all that stuff on the right that looks all scribbly is us mapping play and mapping how the space was used by the kids before in the green, and then after our design in the yellow. So really trying to understand how to maximize a site, understand how kids use it, make spaces multifunctional, leave lots of choices for use, and lots of kind of undirected uses. So how to create a space that is playful and play filled without necessarily kind of expensive traditional play equipment. Another project that we did that has really kind of influenced how we work on something like Unity Park is a project we did up in Woburn. It was a little Main Street pocket park that we did a master plan for. And we look at community process as more than just voting between design schemes. I think sometimes traditionally you see community meetings held, designers come with a couple of options, and a community is asked to vote on that. But we like to engage really early on to understand the community and their priorities. And that was something that Gretchen and Patty were working on with the Lena Park community well before we got involved. But yeah, more than just a kind of list of programming or a list of stuff that people want in the space, trying to think on a bigger level how a space serves its community, all members of the community. And we work through that ourselves with a ton of precedent images and trying to meet in the space with people. I think we really feel that that's a critical move, is to physically engage in the space that you're talking about designing. And so really that community engagement becomes something, and even again, what Gretchen and Patty have already described, I think shows it, that it's not a kind of one-shot deal. It's not a meet with the community once, show them something and get some comments, that it's really about a constant feedback loop. And, which this really simple graphic shows that there is going back and forth, that you get community input, you design, you go back and forth and do that a number of times over the life of the design, and that it really, that really does shape the design in really, really significant ways.
Yeah, I think I would even jump in here, Gigi, and say, where we are in this process. Patty and Gretchen really started with the community group here at the beginning. We picked up somewhere in the middle, went back and forth with the community, but maybe this line should, it also continued through construction.
Yeah, in this case,
yeah, and hopefully we'll kind of continue after that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll show you some images at the end. There's still community work going on in the space as it's the completion is happening. So, but to jump you to the site, our site is on the kind of southeast corner of Franklin Park on Blue Hill Avenue. We're right across the street from Franklin Park. And it is a small urban site. It is Blue Hill Avenue, as a lot of you probably know, is a really busy, very active street, loud street. We have residential units on two sides of the site, and then a really busy tire shop on the third. So it's certainly a bustling site for sure. And it means that the edge conditions are really a critical part of this. So every last inch of this site matters. And this was just a quick diagram that looked at noise, and we happen to have some really, elegant things like trash sites to deal with on either side of us as well. And so there were really a lot of, the edges were not something to be ignored by any means. And, when we spent some time out on site, really quickly, some of the things that we, really saw from an analysis standpoint were that when you get back into this site, that you're actually up on the same elevation as Franklin Park, and that Blue Hill Avenue is a little lower than you from there, and you really can connect to that larger open space. That this edge of Franklin Park has a ton of old oak trees in it, so there's a real kind of green oasis across the street from you, and you really can make that connection across. But, again, there's this loud street there in the middle and a lot of other things going on. And it just meant that we knew right away that every last inch of the park counted, and everything had to do double and or triple duty out there. So nothing could be kind of one dimensional that we were doing. This was the slide that you saw a couple minutes ago, the schematic design that we inherited. That had already gone through a number of iterations with various community members, and there was a lot built into this, and it's a really rich diagram, and it really encapsulates the programmatic pieces, and we then kind of distilled that down to a simple kind of site partie in terms of how what that had set up in terms of the different pieces of the site and how they were relating to each other. So there was a play area in the back and a larger kind of open plaza with a stage, kind of open performance space, some landscape buffers. and a kind of consistent edge treatment around it. In this early concept design, it was a series of walls, but and then for us, we really worked, we kind of fleshed that out into a couple different design options and really ended up with two main spatial concepts of, there's probably 4 or 5 feet of grade difference on this site. And so you have, to navigate that, and a couple different ways that we looked at, you could do that. One was having kind of 2 levels, a terrace site with this slope in between. And we really quickly got into, that transition zone needs to be also an inhabitable space itself. And then on the right, there had been a concept of, or you could look at this if we're going to just get up to site as fast as we can to have one large kind of clean open space. We really did think about this site in terms of play, and how do you make play welcome everywhere without, when you get into traditional play equipment, there are a lot of space constraints on that based on code and fall zones. And we also felt like, given that this park needed to serve not just kids of a certain age, but an adult community, an elderly community, that having kind of just singular play items out there could actually exclude certain people. So, how does this park, again, welcome this play and encourage this play while also being useful for all the different demographics that want to be out there? We got into ideas of community gardening, water play as obviously an active thing for kids or anyone on a hot day to go in, but also as a sound feature and an aesthetic feature. How does seating help with grade change, negotiate grade change? Also is a place for people to rest, but of course is also a place for people to play. Really starting to think about edges as places for engagement and places for communication. So not just kind of, making an edge that just is a kind of defined piece of separation, but how can you actually activate that edge and have that be a kind of useful part of the program too? Things that are sensory stimulating, for example, and then also things like, blackboards as being potentially a part of an edge that becomes a place for communication, for local communication. And also inherent in that is this idea that things should always be changing and evolving, and the idea of having a space that people could constantly be leaving their mark on. And that's actually a theme that has come up again more recently with the youth group. That we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But really, this is where we landed, and again, spatially, these schemes are pretty similar, but we just were using 2 different organizational kind of styles. But really looking at how does grading help us with circuit and play, and not just becoming an accessibility kind of thing to solve, but this should be an integral part of how the space is used. And our kind of final schematic design we called the bowl scheme, and had a lower plaza, a sloped walkway, a curved slope walkway that gets you up to an upper level that has mounds in a grassy area and a stage. And we use that embankment for stairs and slide, which again, you'll see a couple times in other images.
Sorry.
Lisa, I'll hand to you.
Yeah, so I mean, after the first month or so of working with mostly the Lena Park advisors and the building committee, the park committee, the director, youth coordinator, and other sort of adults, having meetings with Patty. And I should mention Patty was really involved in this whole process. So with the beginning, with the BSA, and then through the interview process, through our analysis, and through all of our initial designs. So it was really keeping that that sort of knowledge base sort of within the process, which was great. And then it was bringing the youth council back. You know, you might see here, these are kids that were at the table at the BSA and there when they were really first starting to formulate ideas about the project. And so we came in and represented to them sort of what we had learned about the site and started a conversation about sort of the development of the scheme and where they had left it. And, you know, after our initial presentation of the site analysis, you know, we put pens to paper. We brought out sticky notes and we got to work and critiqued the drawings, critiqued the design, and invited their direct input. Also, as a, you know, another means of kind of engaging them on, you know, how their program had changed or not. We were working at the time, we had a woman on our team, Claudia Pavarchik, who is a wonderful community engagement sort of specialist and architect she has a firm called Studioful, and she designed these wonderful kind of postcards for everyone to fill out with questions to answer about the, you know, about how they saw the park being used. And the questions that we asked were, you know, where could daycare kids play? How will daycare kids play? And what amenities might they need on site? And so all of these questions we asked of, you know, school-age children, families, seniors, kids with special needs. Like these were all of the people, the multiple generation of people that the youth group had said, you know, need to be part of this park. And so again, it was inviting their input to think about how we could create a park that would serve them. And then really for us, it was sort of taking all this information and thinking with them through, you know, what are the shared spaces that all of these groups need? How can they share spaces and where do their needs sort of overlap? What elements are similar to both to really create a genuine kind of multi-generational space.
I just want to jump in briefly on that last one. What we had done at the community cookout that was repeated at this meeting as well, that Gigi and Lisa took up, was to have the students, this youth council actually represent the different age groups. While they were filling out these forms, they each had an age group that they were representing. And they did the same thing at the cookout. They actually went around and interviewed, like, you know, some did the elders, some did the little kids, so that they were really get the voice of really the various ages that would use it. So I just wanted to point that out because it's not clear from those little cards.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, and actually, Patty, I don't know that that's something I knew. So in some ways, it's actually really interesting that we then kind of put them back into those roles, you know, where they had to then play the role of these kids or these adults and these different generations. So
I know that we did it purposefully at the cookout, and we may have mentioned it again here while they were doing it. I thought that was a great idea because they had resources already.
Yeah.
So I don't remember talking about, I just know that they, you know, that was how it happened. So
yeah, right. And these were, I mean, this was a youth group that was really engaged. They were there. You can see from these images, they were, you know, they weren't sitting around a table being presented to. They were active participants. And what's interesting too, you know, is like even this, if you look at the timeline that we started, this was 2 years earlier that they had been kind of engaged in this process to begin with. And these are teenagers, and teenagers grow and they change every day. And so to bring them back 2 years later and to find that, hey, they're actually still really engaged and they're really interested in this process and want to be part of it was super exciting for us. Because, you know, as professionals, we want to do this. You can see here, so Mitch was back. You know, he played a big role in the, you know, with Patty and Gretchen at the early charrette. He was at the table. Taylor was at the table. All these volunteers who played a role earlier came to the charrette and were super involved in weighing in mentoring and listening and doing a lot of listening to the youth group in what they were interested in. So this is a great support system, I think, for the youth group and a great client really for us in trying to really ascertain if what we were showing them was what they were after in their initial ideas. So again, you can see here, they drew on plans, they put sticky notes on, these kids weren't shy about what they wanted, and they wanted their, space for their community. And it wasn't just for them, it was really for the community. And so after the meeting, I think we were really charged with having to distill these ideas once again, that came out during the meeting, to summarize, digest their comments. These are just, some of them in terms of the kind of very inviting spaces that they wanted. Non-traditional, I think initially where they had thought about having like one big piece of play equipment and then realizing that would take up the entire space. They understood kind of breaking it up into a lot of different components, creating social spaces for seniors and overlapping spaces for kids and adults. They didn't want typical fencing, but something that was really inviting and open to the community. A space for folks in the apartments next door, or maybe part of the Lena Park community, to come over and find a community garden space, multi-sensory spaces for children with sensory processing issues. They wanted the space to be safe above all. So lighting was a huge factor. And they wanted to, in many ways, leave their mark on this project and on the park. And so I think the idea of, their being able to help create a mural for the project is one that we took very seriously and have tried to follow through with the project development. And this is really where the project landed in terms of design. While, diagrammatically, it had gone in many different directions, it really came back to something pretty similar to what their first conceptual diagrams were. The lower plaza is defined by, so we have a very big sort of open plaza here, which is defined by seating. And as Gigi, talked through, sort of the grade, helps us mediate the grade change from the bottom of a sloped walkway that leads you up to this upper area, as well as having the ramp here. The plaza is, big enough that it could invite a gathering if Lena Park wanted to have tables and chairs out there for an event. But it's also, can be active play where we have water play for kids in the summertime. The community garden planters are there. There's storage. And, one of the fun things to think about in this design was really, was this transition from, grade 0 to grade 4 and how we do that. And, again, to the point of being able to use every last inch of the park or the land here was, what do we do with this transition zone? We have gardens that come up along a sloped walkway. We have the stairs to get you up and down. We also have a slide, right, that kids can use to circuit through and around and back up through the stairs and up into a play lawn area where there are mounds that kind of define a more enclosed space. There are little nooks and crannies where you can sort of walk along a path and maybe find a more secluded area sort of in the planting. There's a blackboard, a sensory wall, there's additional seating here. Very important to the youth was being able to have a stage where they could go and where they could set up and have open mic. So there's electricity out there and they could perform or have performances happen out there. People can sit on the mounds or out on the lawn. There's a grove of trees with seating sort of throughout the grove of trees. And then at the back of the site also some sensory garden space. So, to Gigi's point again, it was about packing in as much as possible into, this 5,000 square feet. And from that, we really turned it into a set of construction drawings and pushed through the pandemic to a groundbreaking.
Yeah, so our groundbreaking, it was actually fun at the groundbreaking because we had, despite it being kind of still height of pandemic, always great to have a reason to be outside. We had the director of Lena Park at the time and some of the other folks there, the head of the youth group. We had some of the youth council members there. You can see in that lower left image, and Representative Russell Holmes, who's the Mass State rep for this neighborhood. So it was, great. Again, this continuation of having members of the youth council. We felt it was important for them to have eyes on this site while it was in construction. So we wanted them to really, be a part of what was going on and feel like they could be, seeing it and kind of advocating for the park while it was going to go from being a kind of quiet spot to being a huge mess for a while. It's great for people in the neighborhood to have, ways to hear about it and people advocating for that space while it's under construction. And we'll just roll you through some of these pictures pretty quickly. And, as we were working on putting this together, we didn't know just how far it was gonna get out there. In the last kind of 2 weeks, we've seen huge steps in finishing up, but still we'll just take you back in time. This was early on excavation and starting to grade and starting to really carve out the space on site. These are the kind of front portions of the site. So looking at this, that's the walkway and the left image being staked out.
Yeah, we should also add, I guess, that the contractor was really sure he was going to find a foundation of a house or something under there, which we were really lucky we didn't.
We didn't. Although we do think there was a building on this site at one point, but we did not find remnants of it. We instead found lots of utilities that had been dead-ended to the site. So we do think there was something there once upon a time, or that's what historical records show, but there was no physical evidence of that on site. Forming up the curved wall that defines the lower terrace and the stairs, those were kind of some of the first features that went in on site. Our back grove that has seating in it that is seating, but also, as you can imagine, we expect kids to play through this space, to run on these, jump from stump to stump. But it does provide a kind of shady, quiet spot in one of the back corners. And then forming the upper level, which was, needs to be a kind of artful process, creating these mounds that, as Lisa described, they are seats for, and the image on the right, you can see that image on the right, kind of towards the back left of that is the stage. And these mounds provide kind of casual seating facing the stage and really define this lawn space, but are also, of course, a very playful element. The fence that we did is a corrugated metal fence, and we did a series of panels that, again, Lisa referenced in our plan, but with a bunch of different textured metal panels in them to create some sensory interest. And there's a blackboard as well, and that's all with some, these things they're called kernel seats, those kind of white rocks they look like, that are seats in front of the sensory panels and the blackboard. So it's another kind of hangout nook. Putting the slide in was a custom concrete slide. You can see on the left, the contractors look pretty happy. I think we were all pretty happy that it went in and didn't break in the process. It's a pretty big crane putting that in place, but and then you can see this picture, I think Lisa took about 3 days ago. So you can see that slide in place in the slope next to the steps. This long wall is on the left. You can see it was an existing wall on site that we, for a series of reasons, ended up lining it with a new wall. And so we have this great big blank canvas, and this is where the mural is going to happen that the youth council is involved in. So it has been, you can see on that right image, it has been primed and is ready for their work. And Lisa's going to explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so again, it was during the pandemic that a lot of our construction started. And it was difficult to organize the youth as the center had changed their programming. Many of the older youth were no longer in the program, had kind of aged out and were working, but they still wanted to be involved. And so the youth coordinator at the time was great about kind of gathering everyone up. We met on site, measured the wall, talked about sort of how long the mural should be, where it should go, and worked together to help prepare an RFP to select an artist to work with them on the project. So here's the wall, as Gigi mentioned just a couple days ago, being primed. And what's missing here in this shot are the sort of large planters that'll come in, that'll sort of, be kind of dispersed in front of the wall there. But during the about the end of the summer, we selected 3 sort of finalists for the artist RFP, and the youth group interviewed them via Zoom and made the ultimate selection of an artist that they wanted to work with, and were able to actually call and let them know that they were selected. And this is the group, they're called Take One Artists. And the 2 artists that are part of this are Wiso and Gio, their nicknames. Wiso's name is Luis Taforo and Gio's is Hanato. Gio is a traditionally taught artist. He's currently an art teacher for Madison Park High School. And Wiso has more of a non-traditional training, is a self-taught graffiti artist who over time grew into having his own business and becoming a full-time muralist. And Wiso and Gio often work with youth groups, school groups. And I like that one of the things they said that was most important to them when working with youth groups is to spend time training the youth so that they're able to speak about the mural and their work kind of confidently, so that they really feel a part of kind of the imagery and the images that are going on the wall. One of the other nice things is that both of them are from the area. Wiso's from Roxbury in Boston, and Gio was born and raised in Roslindale. So they're both super involved in the neighborhood and the community. And this is just a smattering of some of their work that we've seen to date. Stylistically, their work is pretty varied. And while we're all waiting kind of on pins and needles to see the final plans, we haven't seen them yet. So we apologize for having this be a little anticlimactic, but there's no big reveal today. You'll have to come to the park in a couple weeks to see the finished work, because I think it's supposed to be approved by the youth group this week. And all we know is that it's really colorful and it says Unity Park, and the kids were a big part of the conception of it, which is great. And so this is where we are as of this morning. The sign is up, the fencing is finally coming. We'll kind of finish to the left of this, but this is Unity Park. We're in the home stretch, and we'll be excited to announce the opening at the end of the month. But that's it. So I think, in closing, we wanted to kind of pose some questions, maybe, to ourselves, in that, what were some of the toughest aspects of the community's design process? I mean, the first one I think that came to my mind was the time challenge. That this was that, there were a lot of challenges of having to work through a process over a 4-year period. I mentioned one thing about working with teens where, if they started at 14 or 15, they're young adults at this point, and keeping them engaged is no small task. There's also turnovers in partners in the Community Development Corporation. People change roles, move on. And I think what's become really apparent to us is how important those transitions need to be. So when one youth coordinator is leaving, how that transitions to the next one. If a director is leaving, how that transitions to the next director. And and the importance of kind of what was started here as part of the process. You know, for a lot of us, you know, what's been hard about, you know, just life over the last year, the pandemic, and that we weren't able to engage with the youth group during the final detailing and design of the project. And, you know, one of the nicest things I think that Patty had written into the RFP for the project was that they wanted the youth group to come to the design office and to spend a day and to really see how a design office works. What do we do day to day? What kinds of projects you're working on? And we didn't have that opportunity because the world shut down. So that was really disappointing. But I think, you know, to some of the work to speak to some of the work that Gretchen's doing with the BSLA, even giving kids the opportunity to understand what landscape architecture is, right, is huge. That they have, that they're in a position to feel that they can be empowered to change their neighborhoods and their communities is huge. And so I feel like, you know, on a very small scale, we were able to do that with them. And so that feels good. What were some of the more positive aspects of the engagement for us? Again, I think working with the youth group and being able to help them create a park that feels like it's theirs, that is hopefully part of their vision, right? Like you draw something and how exciting to see it built, right, eventually. So our hope is that when they come in and they do see it in its final form, it'll be like, oh yeah, hey, we drew that, or isn't that cool? It's real. That'll be amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's really, I think one of the things that was really important for them too is that I think they will look at a space like this differently forever, because they did see the many iterations that it takes and the many people that it takes, and understanding, kind of being a part of that process allows them to understand just how, you know, that it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that was a huge, kind of a huge lesson for them. And again, is just made their engagement all the more powerful to know that this was something that wasn't a one-shot deal. It's something that takes many iterations over time. And they were a really, really important part of that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's the same with I think if in the end, when they're able to see this mural completed, is going to be wonderful. And I'm glad that we could help make that happen, because I think there were budget challenges. There were challenges of the pandemic and also where it would go on site, and, you know, just organizational challenges in that way. So to see that, to feel like that's going to be realized is a wonderful achievement, I think. And, you know, in the end, and really just in closing, going back to, I think, something that Gretchen brought up at the very beginning about the role of design. And what is the role of design? Can designers effectively contribute to the inequity of public space within underserved communities? Does the design of better public spaces in these communities address a real need? Are we making a difference? Can we as designers make a difference in these communities? And I hope the answer is yes. I hope it was actually a wonderful thing to be able to work with Gretchen and Patty to kind of relive this process and to remind ourselves of where we came, you know, how long it's been, and all the work and all the players involved here. And I think in thinking back, you know, hopefully this process makes it evident that it takes many hands, many organizations, volunteers, and collaboration of community members, but that will prove out as a good thing. And then, are we serving a real need? I think we'd say we hope so. In the way that we looked at the social programming of our small park at the daycare center that Gigi spoke to. You know, we tried to better understand how children play differently within a designed environment. And it would be interesting to study this park, to see how it's used by the community, to understand who comes there, what are they doing there, how do they play there, how do they gather there, how do they rest there. You know, there's little to compare it to, given what it was in a vacant lot. But I think what could become evident to us is, you know, what's working well and maybe what's not. And to really understand from a behavioral perspective, this would be a wonderful thing to document and to study as the park continues or opens sort of through this next season and into the next year and years to come. So I think that's our next effort. That's what we'll embark on, and hope that it informs our kind of next design effort and our next project. So.
Yeah, I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to add, although the park obviously isn't open yet, I think one of the most satisfying things that we've experienced while this has been in construction is the feedback that we get. You know, we can as designers talk all day long about whether we think it's good or not, or whether we think it's successful or not. But the feedback that we've gotten just from the people who stop by while it's been under construction has been really exciting. People go out of their way to come into the entry of the park and ask questions and, you know, show interest in it and show real excitement that this is changing and that this is taking this vacant lot and turning it into a space for everybody's use. Our, Cambridge Landscape, the contractor, has made friends with any number of people who come by on a regular basis. And it's that feedback from the people who are going to be using this every day that really is the most powerful. And, we'll see how that feedback continues. But certainly to date, it's been incredibly encouraging and rewarding to hear that positive feedback from the real users of the space. So.
Thank you. I mean, I think with that, we could open up to questions.
Yeah, questions, please.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Maybe I can read them out loud, and then the four of you can just jump right in and take it on. One is, how do the schemes initiated by G2 connect with the 3 schemes put forth at the very beginning of this process? Where was the youth/community participation and idea leadership? So you broached that a bit in the conversation, but maybe you can dive deeper into that.
I'm just reading it again.
Oh, let me open in the chat.
I was going to say, I'm just looking at the question and I made it disappear.
Well, I can start with that a little bit, Gigi. Basically, they're asking how the earlier schemes by the students when they worked with us, and then when they started working with you, in writing the RFP, there was a moment where, I mean, I looked at a boilerplate, but it wasn't appropriate for this project. And in consultation with all the GDI members that, or at least of the GDI leadership that were all involved in this project, we looked at it and said, we don't have to do a typical one. So we wrote in that there was going to be some kind of an art project of one sort or another. And we actually budgeted it in the cost estimate. And we really wanted that meetings would be continued with the youth council in particular. And I think that the presentation that both Gigi and Lisa made at that one event when we had a number of different folks coming in to interview, what really put them ahead of everyone else was, which I think I could honestly say blew the mind of Catherine Martinez, the executive director, and all of her support staff, was the play mapping. That you guys actually had a way of analyzing the effectiveness of play space, a process that showed that research and data was useful, and they really wanted to be part of that. They wanted to see how those things would be integrated in it, and we're really blown away by that part of the presentation. So that it was incredibly linked between for what our group worked on and then what their group worked on, and there was the youth council remained not only in attendance, but I would say in directing it. Our goal was certainly to be able to provide a way for the leadership of the youth council to become leaders in their own right and for their opinions to be respected. And Gigi and Lisa have, I have so much thanks for them, just being part of that process and watching it unfold and seeing you guys be so respectful and thoughtful about what they had originally wanted in the processes that they had worked on with us and continued with you. And so much, things that they said at the very first meeting, calling it Unity Park, making sure that they took account of membership in their community who had physical and other challenges. Like you guys, you actually incorporated all of that and then kept them very involved in the process. So I would say it was seamless in many ways. And I think at GDI, we're just so thankful because we're also working on what process works, which is why we stayed involved.
Yeah, I don't know if the question is also getting at sort of some of the specifics. If the three schemes we're thinking about are the ones developed with GDI were the plaza, the secret garden, and was it the play space? Might be play space. But I think as
flexible play,
the flexible plaza. Yeah, right. I think that in the end, it was how do we incorporate all of this into one space and create a flexible plaza, create garden space, create small garden space for people, and the play space. And could we try and do that and connect them through these different levels?
Well, right, and have it all hold together as one thing. I think that's, every site runs a risk that when you put a lot of program in it, that you end up with a chopped up site with a lot of little things happening that don't speak to one another. So how do you incorporate all these ideas and actually have it feel like it is one space with subspaces to it, as opposed to just a bunch of small spaces? And that was a real challenge out there.
And probably a very fascinating insight on the design process and the iterative design process for the Youth Council, who are learning about what you do and how it works.
Yeah, I think something that is always tricky about a site like this too is actually just how small it is, and that when you 5,000 square feet is not a big park, and when you look at the heavy list of wants, which all make total sense, but that's a lot for a small site to carry, and I think it can be tricky for us as designers, never mind people who don't design for a living, to think about scale and how things, one of the diagrams that we did along the way that I think was really telling was we did put down a play structure on the site and say, just look at what a kind of typical platform structure would look like. If that's, a thing, one of the things that people want on this site, what if we do that? And you put that on the site and it took up 2/3 of the site. And so everybody realized we had to reconceive that. And I think, that for the youth council was those things were real eye openers for them. Or how do you serve all of these people and all of these needs in a really tight site?
I'll move on to the next question in our Q&A box from Gavin Rudiswelli. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Where did the funding for this project come from? Public, private, etc. And who initially decided that there would be a playground on this site? Was the community involved in this very early decision?
Patty, go.
Patty or Gretchen?
Yes, the community was involved. The funding was public. It comes from CPA, Community Preservation Act funding, which the city of Boston gives out to lots of different types of projects. And we fell into the open space, and Thaddean Brown, as Gretchen mentioned at the very beginning, who is now director of that, but at that time was part of that organization, part of the CPA. And now she's, kind of taken it over. But she recommended it to us. And I think Gretchen, on her behalf, had a conversation with her, and she said, yeah, we could probably find a project that meets up with our mission goals of our organization as part of the BSA, BSLA. And she did. We've actually talked to her about a number of others, and Gretchen and I have had preliminary talks with several other organizations, and we're all open to helping.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd love to. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say there's an interesting history too of this. Actually was a private site for years. The city actually owned it at one point and then donated it to Lena Park. So it has this kind of interesting history of having been a private site, a public site. Now it's technically private in that it's owned by Lena Park Community Development Corporation, but funded by the CPA. So it's a publicly accessible site. So it's a real mishmash over time.
I was curious about taking the particularities of this, this project and this opportunity, and thinking about how this model could be replicated, across the state. You worked with Boston and used Boston funds, or, are there opportunities for public-private partnerships? So just eager to hear your thoughts about making this something that can happen more often and through other super studio models.
Gretchen, you should take that. Talk about what else you're doing and what also you and BSA does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Polly Carpenter is in this audience as well. Rochelle, there's several directions I could go there. I think with all of this, yes, we're aiming to do more because there is, as I suspect everybody on this call is aware, there's an incredible disconnect between those who design this built world and those who inhabit it. And we need to work lots more at every scale and in every community towards that. Specifically, I can say, and I just dropped into the chat some stuff for GDI, and I'm about to put in some things for K-12 engagement as well. I mean, GDI right now is seeking to initiate or do another youth engaged design process like this in the city of Worcester for a site there. And so looking, locally, or at least within the Commonwealth here, but there are also projects in process in other parts of the world that the GDI committee is working on. And again, in the BSA structure, it's one of the knowledge communities. So for anybody who gets knowledge community newsletters from BSA, click on that GDI link for that, or keep an eye out for that. And for BSLA, for the super studios as well, again, we piloted it last spring in Boston and on the North Shore, and we're in the process of developing those partnerships for this upcoming spring. So I don't want to specifically put any organizations on the hook, but I can say right now we're in conversation with about 4 or 5 different groups and are looking to scale this. And it's also, and this is something that Lisa and Gigi and I have talked about too, one of the things this has also done is helped us see where many of the gaps are for youth who are part of the Unity Park design process and want to do more than what, right? And is there a summer, or they want to say, like, what would it be like to work in an office? What would it be like to do this? Can we as a collective design industry, architecture and landscape architecture, set up summer internship exploration opportunities for high school youth who then want to take this one step further? And where are some of those gaps, and how can we as a collective start to address those? So those are some things we're thinking about right now.
I would also say that, a goal of GDI, I mean, Rochelle, we do have our process kind of mapped out, so we can give you that and certainly share the RFP and things that we wrote. I mean, I think they're publicly available, but I'll give you a copy so I can send you one. But But I would say that, our goal is really to let at-risk youth throughout the city and broader understand that they can have access to design processes and being eventually engaged, if they're interested in studying it, in design of landscape or architecture or any of the other ones. And, that was part of the reason I baked in the visit to their offices, because I really wanted the youth to be able to go there and to feel that. So anybody who's in a firm out there wants to do that, we between Gretchen and I, and I'm sure Rochelle and BosNOMA, we can act, and the BSA, we can really connect you to K-12 groups who would love to come visit and maybe think about what would it be like if they actually attended a school of architecture, landscape architecture, graphic design, whatever it is that might be something that they would fancy. Animation, any of those kinds of art and design fields. There's places, there's many design schools in the city there, and in Boston and Cambridge, 5 total. So there's certainly a lot of access, and we just want to engage them. That's the goal.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? We've got a couple of minutes if anyone wants to jump in. I guess with that, thank you so much. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Will there be a follow-up research documentation as to how the space gets used after it's completed?
We would like to. We have not formalized any plans for that yet. We've been in the mode of just trying to get this built since it's taken almost twice the time that we had anticipated. But we do, our office does do mappings and has a process for how to document, especially kids' use in a space. And so we'll have to be kind of on top of when are times that the park is kind of more heavily used, when we can go and observe and do some documentation, because we do look at that as a really important post-construction critique of our work, for sure. And so we don't have plans to publish that. I don't know. don't know what follows.
We wanted to also join them. I mean, this was something that's been on our list since the inception, that we would actually look at it a year after. And Lisa and I were talking about it earlier today. So we'll join you to just,
Yeah, I think we have to kind of all put on our best William H. White hats and go out there, and over the next year really just watch and document. And yeah, it would be a fun thing to publish or get out there somehow. So maybe next year there'll be a new forum we could speak to with that. Yeah.
And ideally, some of those initial teens can be involved in that.
Yeah,
too.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
There was a question in the chat about visiting the site, and yes, absolutely. This particular panel, as Lisa mentioned, was actually supposed to be a site visit initially.
That's how it started.
But it's not quite done yet, but soon. And so in the spring, we're aiming to go there on site and experience it in person.
Yeah.
And Rochelle, to your question from a few moments ago about scaling this, I think Patty did some great work in just thinking through the contract of this. And so really baking in engagement in the contract that G2 signed. And one of the things we've started thinking about is, could every CPA project require that? Could every public park project require that? And not only require it, but also fund it, because it takes time to do it. well, right? And so how can we as a professional collective start to bring some of these things to a larger scale?
Right, and always reconsidering or always being willing to think about what that community engagement actually is. So I think that was some of the power in this RFP, was that it wasn't just you have to have X number of community meetings and as a line item, which is what it often is, but really, gee, what is engagement, and who, this was actively engaging, a youth council, which is not necessarily who, when people think about community engagement, they're necessarily thinking, and things like an office visit and stuff was kind of, reframing just what community engagement as a one-liner can mean. And I think we have to always be trying to think outside of the box, and depending on each community, kind of what is that? What does that outreach and engagement look like? And it should be different all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
going to say, Rochelle, and also in response to Gigi, my attitude was, in the end, I went back to Gretchen and said, I'm kind of baking this stuff in. I want to be really specific. And, everybody thought that was a great idea. So that's why we baked in some things quite specifically to be clear about the level of engagement that we were looking for, particularly with, these kids were so unbelievable at that very first meeting. I was just so impressed that there was no way that they weren't going to continue, working on it. So when we got to the point of writing that RFP, it was really actually a lot of fun. Not actually, and I think it could be, even a bit better, of course, should be evolved. And so my goal is actually how to evolve that kind of a document and then go to the city dean and say, look, we think that this is, really a better way to do these kinds of projects. And then put a line item in for public engagement. I think we need maybe a line item. There has to be a line item for it.
There was a reference to community engagement expertise
Yes.
through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like, along with, getting the RFP to bake in, community engagement in the process, maybe that there is someone who's professionally trained to do it.
Well, Claudia was really wonderful to work with, and just so he was at the interview and ran some of the initial meetings with the youth. Our ideas were really interactive and really fabulous.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that that we ran into this pandemic, because she was brought on because we wanted her to kind of continue through the entire project, being kind of that design team side youth coordinator, right? That she could be the direct mouthpiece, right, to the design team and to engage them in a lot of different ways. Because, even to speak to, just getting a project built, there's a lot that an office has to kind of pour into that it's almost like you need the added help or the added expertise or the even added staff person just to really spearhead that and keep it going throughout the process. And so Claudia was fabulous in that.
Well, and we've had someone in our office who that has been her main role since it's been in construction and working on this mural work. It's, we've had one person have that be their kind of realm. There's enough time that goes into that, into coordinating this, the RFPs for the mural and all of that work. That's taken, one person's dedicated work. So it does take a lot of time.
All right, unless there are any last questions. Thank you so much. This is great. The project is so wonderful, and we're really excited to see it when it's ready.
Right.
It's pretty soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
attending.
Thank you
Really
all.
appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.